From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Have you ever struggled to measure and/or articulate the impact of a continuous improvement initiative? If you answered yes, then this episode is for you. It's a recorded conversation that I had recently with Dr. Lynn Kelley. Dr. Kelley has an impressive CV. She's currently a senior advisor to BBH Capital Partners and an LEI board member. In 2018, she retired from Union Pacific Railroad, where she was a senior vice president of supply chain and continuous improvement. It was this experience that she and I drew upon. Before Union Pacific, Dr. Kelley was employed at Textron as the vice president of operational excellence. She was previously a professor and department chair at Madonna University, where she taught undergraduate and graduate statistics courses. Prior to becoming a professor, Dr. Kelley held the position of executive vice president and chief operating officer at Doctors Hospital in Detroit. Dr. Kelley holds a Ph.D. in evaluation and research from Wayne State University, an MBA from Michigan State University, and a bachelor's degree in business management from the University of Detroit Mercy. She's published many articles as well as 3 books in the fields of statistics and operational excellence. She completed postdoctoral fellowships with both the U.S. Census Bureau and the American Society of Engineering Education. Given her various fields of study, myriad achievements, and executive experience, I was eager to talk to her. Here's our conversation. Well, Lynn, thanks for stopping by.
You're welcome.
The world headquarters here for the Lean Enterprise Institute here in Boston, Massachusetts. Wonderful that you were in town and had the opportunity to come by and carve out a little time for a conversation with me. So this is the On the Job podcast, as you know, where I'm lucky enough to be able to sit down with executives with far more experience than I, which is not such a high bar. But the purpose of these conversations is to the extent possible for me to sort of borrow the learning curve, so to speak, to learn from your experience as I seek to effectively lead this organization and help others who are in similar positions. And I'm really excited to have you today to talk about your experience as an executive for the Union Pacific.
Good. Thank you.
You shared with me earlier you were there for 7 years and had as your kind of primary responsibility leading the continuous improvement activities there, but also responsibility for other aspects of the business. So I guess maybe you could start with just, I guess folks probably are familiar with Union Pacific, more or less, but maybe just an overview of the company for those who may not be.
Sure. So Union Pacific Railroad is a railroad that operates primarily west of the Mississippi River, and when I'll be describing it, I'll also talk about how we're organized, and we're organized throughout that whole geographic area in service units, and every service unit has its own leader and its team and its engineers and conductors that go to and fro from that service unit. And I was there for 7 years, and I really enjoyed the culture of the railroad. It was a great experience for me.
So I understand that one of the reasons that you joined the organization was to help with introducing what you've called, or what the organization called, the Union Pacific Way. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I guess, what was the Union Pacific Way,
Sure.
and what was the reason for its introduction?
Sure. Okay. So, I was brought in the company because the leadership wanted to formalize an approach to continuous improvement. They liked the name UP Way because Union Pacific often goes by its nickname UP. So they called it the UP Way. It wasn't clearly defined, and there hadn't been a company-wide or an operating-wide deployment at that point. So we were right at the beginning of defining what it would look like. We decided that we would start very, very basic. Because we're talking in the operating department of 40,000 employees who are spread out over the U.S. and are not under a roof. And so We chose 5 tools to start with, along with leadership philosophies, and the tools were things like 5S, leader standard work, standard work, very foundational ways to think about continuous improvement.
So this introducing the UP way was being done kind of across the enterprise. Had there been experiences prior to you joining the company of like initial discovery about what would ultimately become kind of codified as the UP way?
Actually, yes. It was a pretty interesting thing to walk into. There had been a leader of continuous improvement hired before me, and that person had recruited out from outside of the company approximately 20 people to join and perform continuous improvement. But they all had different methodologies. So some of them were Six Sigma, some were Lean, some were industrial engineers, and everybody worked in their own service unit and just improve things any way that they wanted to. The only consistency that we had in that organization was the mechanical department, and these are the folks that repair the locomotives. And they had a leader that had discovered Lean and wanted to do Lean in his area. So independently, in the mechanical part of the organization, we had the very foundational beginnings of what we now call the UP way.
Okay. Yeah, I can, remember, I guess, a similar inflection point that that happened at Starbucks when there had been some initial experiments done in areas like the roasting plants, so I guess supply chain more broadly, some things done in some marketing processes, and then where I first was introduced to Lean when there was a kind of a model line experiment run in Portland, Oregon. And anyway, after a couple of years of these sort of disparate experiments, also with different methodologies, I guess, as the company was exploring, like how
there's
will this
nothing wrong with
apply
that, right?
here?
Yeah, it's good. It's experimentation.
But there was that inflection point where the company kind of said, all right, let's sort of codify what will be our way, and let's introduce that kind of as far and wide as we can. For Starbucks at that time, it was this was 2008, so there was an economic crisis that was really driving the sense of urgency to introduce lean thinking across the company. Was there a similar, I guess, what was the motivation behind bringing all of this together and getting it company-wide?
I think the fact that we had a chief operating officer that was new to his role, and he had originally come from manufacturing. And that was a new thing. It never happened at the railroad before. And he knew lean from manufacturing, but he didn't have a mechanism to, or an individual to lead the charge to roll this out to the operating department.
Okay. And so you became that individual.
It was. I was the one with my team, yes.
Wonderful. So I know a big part of what you, I think, brought to that role was, obviously your experiences from before joining Union Pacific, working for Textron, and your education as well. And obviously that experience informed the approach that you took, and even how the company kind of measured the impact of the change over time. So I think, in a lot of ways that's what I'm eager to learn from you today is about sort of those ingredients to the initiative. So maybe you could start by sharing a little bit about, what was unique maybe to the approach, or even some of the components of the UP way that were being introduced, and how that was being measured and monitored.
Yeah. So part of my personal belief system is that we spend a heck of a lot of time thinking about how we're going to implement something, and a lot of time implementing that thing, and not much time seeing if it's working and doing course correct and finding ways to get quick feedback so that we can correct something if we need to. And so what I was determined to do in a rollout of this magnitude with 40,000 employees spread out, where that you'd maybe only see 2 employees together at a time, you'd have to get mechanisms that will give you feedback pretty quickly if your deployment is failing. Maybe it's succeeding in St. Louis, but maybe it's failing in San Diego. You have to know what's happening where. And so we set up these easy ways to gather and analyze data at really inflection points. And one of those inflection points was when people were trained. And the way that I've thought about the training is that most companies, when they're going to say we're going to roll something out, they measure what?
I mean, the number of people trained.
Exactly. That's the first thing. It's the easiest thing. It's what everybody measures. But just because someone's trained doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to use it, right? So a higher level of measurement, you probably want to know how many people are trained, but you really want to know, are they using whatever you taught them? Sure. Because that's a waste of time if they don't use it. But even higher than that, you want to know if it's making a difference.
Right.
So, that sounds daunting. Can we get that data? Well, yes, we can. And we can get it really easily. And that's what we ended up doing, is developing a system that allowed us to get all three of those data points really easily and course correct wherever we had to.
Well, so I've heard you even use a sort of a term or different terms to describe these different approaches to implementing and deciding on what will be measured. The difference between, as I understand it, operational speed and strategic speed.
Exactly.
Maybe you can enlighten us a bit on what is the difference there.
Well, a number of years ago, I read an article in Harvard Business Review, and I stole this concept because it really resonated with me. And I don't remember the exact. I actually have written down somewhere the exact numbers, but this was a group that studied large-scale company-wide deployments throughout the world, not just in the U.S., but throughout the world.
Deployments
of new initiatives.
Okay.
Businesses and organizations, healthcare, whatever, who are trying to deploy something new. A new IT system, all different kinds of things. And what they found was that, in general, companies went after deployments in two different ways. Most companies did something called operational speed. Operational speed means that you put together your implementation plan and with your milestones and your dates, and it's on your market, set, go. And everybody's racing to the finish. And you just boop, 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 boop. I met my deadline. My success is measured that I'm green on my date. So it's just like saying I'm green on my, if one of the dates was I have to have this many people trained by this date, then I'm green, right?
So the combination of those two things, having a date to train
a number of
50%
people
of the employees or something.
Exactly.
Okay.
But a few of the companies did something differently. And they, instead of operating along this, they did have an implementation plan. They did have timelines, but they had feedback loops along the whole implementation plan. And they were measuring not just, did you do this by this date, but is it working? And if it isn't, how are we going to course correct and do that quickly before we roll it out any further? And so I'm a very, very strong believer in that. And I was determined, if I was going to take on this Union Pacific assignment, that we were going to do operational speed. And in fact, when I had my interview with the CEO and the head of operations, I said, if you want to go fast, I'm not your person. And if you want to do this without thinking about employee engagement, I'm not your person. This is what I believe. I believe in strategic speed, and I believe in employee engagement, and neither of those can be sacrificed. And both the CEO and the head of operations said, that's what we want to.
Okay.
It's amazing.
So I can imagine, I mean, it's not hard to imagine what a measurement of number of people trained by such and such a date would look like.
Sure.
So to in addition to that, be measuring at strategic speed, as you described it, to be measuring sort of this higher order of outcome.
Yeah.
We can talk about the ultimate objective being, are we getting the results that we were after around engagement or maybe other business results? But in between, the at strategic speed. What is it exactly that you were measuring to get the feedback that you wanted, where adjustments might be made based on that feedback?
So this was a really easy thing to do. I highly recommend it. Basically, we had two purposes of this methodology that I'm talking about. We wanted to measure the effectiveness of each instructor because the leaders were teaching their own people.
The leaders were teaching the people.
Exactly. We were teaching these lean tools and lean concepts, but the leaders of that department, of that site, they were there teaching, and we had a lean person in the room with them to help coach if needed, and of course they prepped them ahead of time. But we needed to make sure that the leaders, who are not necessarily teachers by trade, were communicating the tools effectively, and the concepts effectively. So that's the one thing we had to measure, the effectiveness of that. But also, again, like I said, are the people using the tools after the training? So this is what we did. In every single class that we taught, we simply had all students complete a 4-question survey before they left the room. It was Likert scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So strongly disagree, strongly agree. And these are the 4 questions. So after the training, before they left the room, they told us if they understood the concept, number 1. Number 2, did they think they had the skills to apply the concept or the tool? Number 3, did they understand how the concept or the tool would improve the workplace? And number 4, did they believe that the concept would improve employee engagement?
Okay. So this is at the moment that training has concluded, more or less, and then there's these questions that are kind of speculative in nature.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, do you understand? Yes or no? Or on the scale of 1 to 6.
Exactly.
More or less. Do you believe you have the skills, think you have the skills to apply it? Do you understand what would be the benefit if you applied it? Okay, good.
Understood. And I'll talk about how we use that in a minute, but let me go to the follow-up. Now, we gathered that data anonymously, but we kept it segregated by class. And the classes were geographically located. So the leader of that group is teaching that class.
Right.
Now, we like to do 2 months later. Sometimes it went as long as 4, so I have to say 2 to 4 months later, but mostly 2 months later, all of those students received almost the exact same survey to complete, and again, anonymous, but now the questions were changed. Instead of asking, the first time we asked, did they understand the concept? We still ask them on question 1, do you understand it? So we just want to make sure 2 months later, do you still remember it? Did you understand it? But now the questions change on question 2. On questions 2, we said, have you applied the tool or the concept?
So now it's about demonstration versus speculating.
Are they using
I think
it?
I have the skills.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Question number 3. Now this gets hints at results, but we had a more robust way to do this later. But this is question number 3 is: has this tool or concept improved your workplace? So are things better? Or was there no change whatsoever once you applied 5S or whatever it is?
Was better defined in any way, or kind of from their point of view?
From their point of view, we just said improved. The actual word was improved. My workplace.
Okay.
And then the last question was, has this tool increased employee engagement? Okay. So those were the 4 questions. Now, what do we have? We have pre-post. We have a comparison, and we're able to look at the average response after the training versus the average response 2 months after the training.
Okay. So we've got the UP way. It consists of these 5 tools that have been codified from these different methodologies that have been sort of the experiments running in years up until then. And in these classes that were organized around sites or departments, so teams of people that would have been kind of working together, experiencing training provided by their leader, who had been prepared and supported by a lean expert. I guess a lean expert being someone from your team?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And at the time that the training is concluded, and then 2 to 4. we weren't happy with 4, but it happened. 2 to 4 months later, we administered the survey for a second time.
Yep.
So, all right, what were the outcomes? What did you measure as a result?
We were thrilled with the outcomes, to be honest with you, because the average response to all of the questions right after training was that they agreed, that they understood, they agreed that they thought they could use it, all of those questions. Mm-hmm. The average response 2 months later was they agreed, they did understand it still, they had applied it, it had improved the workplace, and it had increased employee engagement. Mm. That's agreed on the overall scale, and there was no statistically significant difference between each pair of those scores. So what we found is, on the whole, we were good to go. Mm-hmm. However, the whole is different. Remember, all those classes are segregated.
Sure.
So the aha moment for us is that we were able to detect 2 months later the sites that did not implement, or the sites where they did and it didn't add value for them, or the sites where their employee engagement did not increase. And that then involved a visit, coaching, finding out why, what's going on. Mm-hmm. We were also able to detect from the first survey which instructors need more coaching, because these are our leaders. We have to ensure that they're able to communicate the lean concepts. And if they just taught a class and people said they didn't understand the concept, we've got to coach those leaders. So it's nipping those little problems in the bud as soon as we can detect them, and then moving forward and course correcting when you have to.
2 months later, I mean, that's a quick feedback loop right there.
Yeah.
A couple of things about that sort of occurred to me. The notion of the site leader leading the training.
Yeah.
We had a phrase for kind of a similar approach that we were taking at Starbucks. We called it leader-led.
Yes.
A colleague of mine, Karen Gaudet, who you know, was one of these leaders out in the field that was being equipped by sort of lean experts, I guess, like me, to be responsible for that training. It wasn't something delegated to you and your team of lean experts. So that's kind of a striking characteristic of the approach that you were taking. But then also those questions. So I guess, it could have been in a matter of 2 months that we checked the training box. All 40,000 folks have been trained, and so mission accomplished. But that's not where we were focused on our measurement. It was around the use of the tools, but the use of the tools. I mean, use being sort of the operative word.
Exactly.
So it wasn't, have you been trained and do you understand this thing? But in fact, are you demonstrating their use to a positive outcome?
Right.
Engagement's gone up as one of the outcomes that were being pursued. And then based on what you learned, there was the opportunity to, because of the way that everything was organized, these classes based on sites, to, in a fairly surgical manner, I guess, sort of go directly to these sites and work with them to help kind of correct the gap.
Yeah, you're right.
That may emerge.
Yeah, and Josh, I think the thing that's really important that I really want to share is that people sometimes think this is too much work. I can't 2 months later survey all these people. But oh my gosh, if it's that important that we roll this out to 40,000 employees, if we don't have time to check if it's working, that just doesn't make sense, right? So,
all right. So this is, I guess, kind of phase one. I mean, really sort of just the first step in introducing the UP way, which was to have an approach to introducing it, to training it, leveraging the site leaders, whittling it down to five kind of core tools, and to check on, all right, did that training, did that introduction, was it effective, right? I mean, was it effective in getting these tools put into use? All right, so certainly a better measurement than just all of, 100% of our folks have been trained. But the next level is, all right, I mean, we're not introducing these tools just for fun. We're introducing these tools because we need to get some kind of a benefit for the organization, some kind of a business result. So I guess that kind of takes us into phase two. And no surprise given your background, there was a way to actually, I guess, conduct phase 2 and then also to measure it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what happened next.
Absolutely. So what we did is we stole a concept from the medical field, and we're all familiar with longitudinal studies of healthcare people who have a certain heart condition and they're taking some type of a drug and they're being studied over a long period of time. It's also called a panel survey. The beauty of that is you get everybody to respond all the time. You don't get like a 20% response rate. You're monitoring real time, and you can follow people over a large time. And then if you do it properly, you can make inferences back to everyone who has a heart, the majority of people who have heart problems or whatever. We decided to take that concept, and we created something that we called the Upp Panel Survey. So let me just describe it. Just kind of hang with me here with the description, because it's important to get the kind of the numbers right. So the 40,000 employees, we wanted to make inferences on implementation effectiveness to all 40,000 employees in the operating department. But if you try to survey 40,000 employees, a conductor who's running on a train back and forth, your response rate's going to be 10, 20%. You're not going to get a good response rate. And
especially over time.
Over time, exactly. And the problem with poor response rates is you then can only your results only apply to the people that you surveyed. And it's sometimes very biased. People who are most dissatisfied often respond. You can't get a good sense of how your whole organization is performing or feeling. So we knew we wanted a strong response rate, and we wanted a response rate above 85%. And so we did the calculations to determine how big our sample size should be if we wanted to make inferences to these employees. And we found that we needed about 350 people to respond to our survey. So what we did is we randomly chose, and random is the other key. Now, the stats lesson's almost over, but in order to make inferences back to a population, you have to have a good response rate and you have to have a randomly chosen sample.
Right.
So we randomly chose, to be safe, 400 people, and we had them in a proportion that fit the proportion of our workforce. So that demographically, our geography of our sample matched the geography of our employees in the U.S., the levels in the organization, and the departments matched. And so it's called a stratified sample. We had a stratified sample. And then we went out to these 400 people, and we asked every one of them, would you commit to being in a panel survey for you'll be surveyed every 6 months, and your commitment is for 3 years. The survey will take you maybe 10 minutes. There's 10 questions, and you are completely anonymous. And not only that, but only one person in the whole company will know your name, that know that you're in this survey, but no one else will know, and they won't be able to link your results with the whole group. And so some people said yes, some people said no. Not many people said no, because we told them, you're going to make a difference. You're going to be the person that represents people just like you around the country, and we need to hear your voice to make a difference. And so the people that said no, we had to replace them with somebody with their same demographics. So we would randomly choose the replacement.
To kind of maintain that stratification, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, and then the way that this is set up is, if you think about, once you have your 400 people, you have your 400 people and they're all set to go. If you run that panel and survey them every 6 months for 3 years, and then after 3 years, you've got to then replace all of them.
The whole population.
Right. And the thing is, if you only keep that panel, you're not going to get new people that join the organization, because your panel's just aging, right?
Well, people might leave too, I guess.
Well, yeah, and then we would replace them with their demographics that fit them, yes. So what we ended up doing is, after year one, we replaced 133 people, so we replaced a third of them randomly with the people that match your demographics. Year two, year three. Okay, that's all the nitty details that you need to
That's
know.
okay. That's okay.
But now let's get to what we learned.
And so you just a target that you
Go
had
ahead.
mentioned earlier was the need to have an 85% response rate.
Yes.
So with this representative panel, stratified and randomized, as you described, did you achieve that response rate?
Absolutely. We were well over 90% every single survey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So what did you find? What was it that
Well-
that these surveys revealed over the 3 years or even beyond?
Okay, so high level, I'll just give you a couple little smatterings. High level, so one of the things that we found is 1 year after launch, 39% of all those employees surveyed said that they benefited from at least one lean tool during the last 6 months.
Okay.
And by year three, 54% of the people said that they had benefited. That's extrapolated over 40,000 people. It benefited from at least one lean tool during the past 6 months.
So from their perspective, things are better.
Exactly. Yeah.
And better directly as it relates to this
From
this
the use
tool.
of the tool.
Okay.
Yes. Or the concept or whatever. And then we did, here's one other example. In terms of standard work, so standard work for the hourly union employees was a little bit harder to get. At the end of year one, we had 31% said that they had used it during the last 6 months,
Okay.
and 41% was 3 years later. So working our way through that population, but slowly but surely. In terms of the management, or let's say the non-union employees, 67% of the employees were using standard work 1 year after launch, and 80% were using it 3 years after launch.
That was the management population. So
That's
using,
the non-union population.
non-union
Yes.
population. Okay.
Yeah.
And just I guess to help me kind of envision what this might have looked like at a work site.
Yeah.
The concept of standard work is one that more or less we're all kind of familiar with conceptually anyway, but
Yeah.
its actual application is going to be different in different contexts.
Yes.
I have never worked in I've never visited a Union Pacific site.
Right.
So can you give me just an example of what
Sure.
sort of standard work at UP looked like?
Yeah. This is an easy one, and this was one that once we realized it, we were able to roll out all over because it was had to do with, if I can describe, you've got a yard,
Okay.
and the yards have like a hump in it,
Okay.
and the cars go over the hump. And then you have somebody who's dispatching to an employee standing next to the hump of when the cars go over the hump into the bowl, and there's all these tracks that spread out like a spider web into the bowl. When they go over into the bowl, how many cars are going to be going over at a time, and then if they say one car, then when that car reaches a certain point, they pull the pin, and then it releases that car, and it can go down in the bowl. Then they may say 2 cars next, and then you release a pin after 2. The challenge we found is that some locations, you had just had people pulling the pins, but sometimes they'd get a derailment when the car was rolling down, sometimes they wouldn't. And the thought was, well, at these other places, they're more standardized at how they pull the pins.
Okay.
It turned out that all we needed to do was do some visual management and paint a line, and educate people that the standard work is to pull the pin right about at this line.
Right, that line.
And we found that it was a much more effective way.
Okay. Not that you're in any way interested in what's going on in my head right now, but as a father of a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old,
Yeah.
I'm realizing that the closest I've come to that particular Gemba is watching Thomas the Tank Engine cartoons with my kids, reading books for 9 years.
Yeah.
And so as you're describing,
Yeah.
as you're describing the yard,
Right.
what I'm
You can
what I'm
visualize.
thinking about is Thomas and Percy and James and Sir Topham Hatt.
Okay.
So
That's
anyhow.
great. That's great.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, ultimately, we're introducing these tools, establishing the UP way for some business benefit, for some
Right.
real result. So, what was it that you were able to to see in the data
Yeah.
that gave you and the organization whatever that helped you understand what was the impact on the business itself
Sure.
with introducing and establishing the UP way.
Yeah, that's right, because that is the final outcome, right? So what we started doing is we were able to create a composite score that showed the maturity of the UP way deployment. And it was quantitative because these are Likert scale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 type questions. So we created a composite score. Then we correlated that score with the business results of that service unit. And remember, the service unit is all of the territory of Union Pacific is divided up into service units,
right.
and they're all led by their own leader. Mm-hmm. And so we now had the maturity of the service unit and their business results, and we started correlating those results. We found no correlation year 1. Mm-hmm. We found no correlation year 2 and started to get a bit worried.
And so the story ends there. It's over.
I was like,
sorry, everybody. Lynn,
shoot.
It's been fun.
Yeah. Anyway, and by year 3, though, which was really, really exciting, it was statistically significant. The highest performing service units in terms of their operational metrics had the highest score on UPWay implementation, or the most maturity. The lowest scoring business units in terms of performance had the lowest score on the UPWay maturity. And it was resoundingly clear, statistically significant. It was just like flashing lights.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Was there, even then, so 3 years in, I made all this investment,
Sure.
Stuck to it, sort of a good case of perseverance to keep after it, even after a couple of years. Were there still questions that this was all worth it, that the UP way was something that that Union Pacific should stay committed to?
During that time, we had an operational change. Our COO moved up to our CEO role, and the new COO took his place. And, anytime you have a leadership change,
sure,
you always worry about that. Mm-hmm. And what was really reassuring is that the CEO wanted at that point to deploy UPWay to the whole organization, and the chief operating officer just embraced it when one of the reasons he got promoted was he had embraced it when he was
from within the company.
Yeah, when he was a regional vice president, and then he just embraced UPWay, and that's really the way he ran the operating department.
And to what extent,
in many ways,
do you think, or do you know that that the measurements, this data, these survey results, were influencing, I guess, the confidence or the conclusions that the executive team was reaching that had them keep after it?
Well, initially we used the results because we could detect which areas were not embracing UPWay. So initially we used the first 2 years, we were using the results to basically detect who was just giving a lip service, who do we need to coach, what do we need to do, and sometimes who do we need to swap out. But by year 3, the results were so resounding that it just became clear that this whole thing was real.
Cool. So an example of for one of these sites that was struggling.
Yeah.
What would providing additional support to that site?
Okay. Well,
look like?
We actually did that.
Countermeasures that.
Yeah, we actually did that. We had a person that was moved in to take over the service unit that had the lowest performance metrics of all the service units, very lowest, and he moved in there, and he was very enthusiastic about UPWay, but had not led a service unit before. And he actually came to our department and asked if we would, do more of an acceleration with him, give him more people, work closely with him, and he wanted to be able to live it, breathe it, do it. And we said, we'll do that. We just want to make sure you're committing to certain things like engagement, and he committed, and we put 3 people there, and they were pretty much around the clock because 24-hour operation for like 3-4 months.
Okay.
And that service unit went from last place to first place in terms of the metrics. It seems like it took about 8 months. I know it took less than a year, but about 8 months, I think. And they were first place in the metrics, which was amazing.
And so those 3 people that were there around the clock, as you say, they were doing what? What, they were an extra set of hands, I guess.
But a lot of coaching. And one of the things that, the railroad is a militaristic model, started, out of the military originally. Union Pacific did anyway. And some, we're really trying to change the culture to less of autocratic and more participative and treating people with respect. And so one of the things that this leader asked us to do was to sit in on his leader standard work sessions with his employees and his direct reports leader standard work with their employees and coach them on how to engage employees in a respectful way. And
so you're talking like real behavioral change.
Real behavioral change.
That was being sought after.
Exactly. And so we did that with him. And this gentleman was so successful, he went on to lead one of our regions, to become one of our top people in the organization from that whole experience. And he had all the makings of an excellent leader, and just wanted a little nurturing, and we just gave him anything we could. He was like a sponge, and he's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, so you're 3 years into this, and there's pretty clear evidence that not only has everyone been trained, which sort of the lowest bar to hurdle over. But also, folks are using the tools as a result of the training itself.
Right.
And furthermore, to the ultimate objective, there are clear correlation, statistically significant correlation between positive business outcomes and kind of adoption of the UP way.
Yeah.
And so those 40,000 folks within operations were benefiting by this time quite clearly. And so I can imagine the desire on the part of Union Pacific to spread the UP way, I guess, to other areas of the business. And so I understand that was kind of the next phase for your role there.
Yeah.
So you can tell me about that.
Yeah. So I was asked to take over the supply chain department, and just to give you some perspective, it's about $9 billion. It was, at the time I took it over, $9 billion in annual spend, and about 300 people, a number of distribution centers, warehouses, including fuel infrastructure, fueling for the locomotives. So it was a fairly complex and large organization.
How many people in that organization?
Yeah, about 300.
About 300.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, give or take. I think they were up to 400 at some point, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess tell me about how UP Way was introduced there, or how the lean approach that was being taken.
So one of the first things that I did when I started was I wanted to get feedback from the people in the department about what was working in the department and what wasn't. And so I didn't want to do a survey. I wanted it to be qualitative and much richer survey. But with 350 people, whatever it was at that point, you can't do interviews with everybody. You can't. It's really tough. But
so why not do a survey?
Because what I would get is, if I do the Likert, which is the numbers, then I can really quickly analyze it, but I don't get at any of the why or what's. I only will get what I ask.
Okay.
And if you don't know what to ask, and you miss the right question, you won't get it back.
Okay.
And so if you do if you ask somebody, tell me what's the best thing, and they're talking to you, then you can get the richness behind it.
Okay.
But I couldn't talk to everybody. So we had always had a town hall that we held every few months. And there was a town hall being held shortly after I started, already scheduled. And what I decided that we could do is I asked everybody in the room, so hundreds of people, to partner with the person next to them and spend 10 minutes to talk about what is the one best thing about our department and what is the worst thing about our department. And then if they both agreed, they could write that on a piece of paper. And then, but if one disagreed, they would put, several answers on the piece of paper. So we could count it. If we only got one right and one wrong, then we could double that, and we know two people agreed that. So already we've consolidated some of the data.
Was there some design into the pairs themselves?
No.
No? Okay.
No, they were just sitting randomly around the room.
Okay.
And we just said, sit next to you. And sometimes we had threes at the end of some of the aisles.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay. So what we got back was really fascinating and a surprise, because what they said, the worst thing about the department is that we work departmentally in our department in silos. And not just that, but they were angry about it. They said there's finger pointing, we get work nobody else wants, they throw it at us. It was very, very emotional, negative feedback about their own department.
So silos being, I guess, sort of thought of as a culprit for some of this, the blame, the infighting, the conflict that they were describing.
Yeah.
So I guess with that kind of an insight, that resounding sort of feedback coming from the folks, good to dig into that, I guess. Maybe to try to understand what is it that's causing this behavior, this culture within the supply chain organization. So what is it that you discovered about that, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, so we did actually a two-pronged approach. One of the things that we did was we just went out and read books and articles on silos, just to understand what have other people learned about silos, and what could we perhaps be using and thinking about, and maybe what caused their silos, did it cause ours? So that was interesting. But then we just went randomly to people, and we started asking them why. Why could that? How could it? Why are we so emotional about these silos? Because when we looked up definitions of silos, it normally said things like it refers to an organization that's made up of divisions that work independently and don't share information. But it didn't say, and they're really, really mad at each other, and they're constantly in email wars with each other, which was what was going on. I mean, I'd look at some of these emails, no, you said this, no, you do that. No, it was just really, I could see why they were so unhappy about that.
Sure.
Anyway, what we realized, which is funny, it's like unintended consequences. And this is a good lesson that I learned. Every time you reorganize, you create different problems. And you just have to remember that, because reorganization is not the perfect solution. What happened maybe 4 years before is there was a major reorganization. And originally, the typical person in the supply department handled kind of all of supply. They interacted with the supplier, they negotiated the contract, if there wasn't really a quality department at that point, but they might look a little bit about quality, they would track on-time delivery, they do the fulfillment, they did the whole thing.
So for a given product. They were sort of had responsibilities across the entire value stream.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then what happened when they were split up is that whole chain was really separated into 7 different steps. And those steps were their own department. So I might negotiate a contract, but now I'm going to give that contract to you, and you're going to work with the supplier to get get it fulfilled, and then you're going to give it to somebody else who's going to look at quality, and you're going to give it to somebody else who's going to
So from a sort of horizontal organization to one that's vertical, then
Yes.
from 0 handoffs to 7.
That's correct. And it appeared that there was no standard work, or very limited standard work, because the roles and responsibilities were not clear between who does what, especially right as you get close to the handoff. And so naturally, that's your job. No, that's your job. No, that's your job. So that's what was happening. And so we did understand then very clearly one of the major root causes.
Okay. So with that further insight into the root causes, what was it that you did about it?
So we created a cross-functional team that was comprised of it where each handoff occurred, and they basically looked at all the responsibilities that they knew were theirs, and then they created a list of all the things that were in question. And then they, for the most part, figured out who should do what. Okay. Sometimes for this thing that no one wanted to do, they asked a leader to kind of make a decision. But in general, clear roles of responsibilities were created and clear standard work was created. Okay. And that was really life-changing.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So with the establishment of standard work, was there anything else that you did to help address this situation?
And this is where this is where a combination of my lean background came in to come up with some other things, but also the research. So one of the things that was pretty resounding in the research is you need to have a unified vision. And so we talked about that. What would that look like? What would that be? And what I loved about that solution is that one of the employees said, well, we're actually really more of a chain because we have these 7 links. And then, of course, supply chain is so common, and we just called ourselves the supply department. So we officially changed our name to supply chain, and then somebody else put the links of the chain around in a circle, and in every link of every one of the 7 links listed the department in that link, and it became our logo. And people put it on their emails, they put it on in their office. It was just, this is us. We are only successful when we are together. And it was a visual, unified vision that we are a supply chain. Okay. And it was a very powerful visual.
So with that sort of image in mind, to sort of relate to, this is who we are, how we want to be, seen as this chain that works effectively together. With, kind of technically speaking, the development of clear roles and routines and standard work for the handoffs. Yeah. Okay, we think of kind of lean as the ultimate social and technical system, but social too. So on the social side of things, what was being done as the standard work was being developed, as the unified vision was being established?
Yeah. Again, I mean, we saw in the research, it used words like you need to create cross-functional collaboration, cross-functional training, cross-functional social activites, cross-functional liaisons, and we just said we're going to do all of it. So what we realized when we looked at all of our departments is every one of the 7 groups was given a budget for their own social events for the year to increase employee engagement. But then they would part of the, even I would hear, oh, they went to a baseball game and we only went bowling. Like they got more money than we. I mean, it was, and we just said, okay,
socialization competition.
Exactly. We're gonna do department-wide events. So we started creating events for everybody. We created monthly training activities in a room big enough to fit everybody, and we trained ourselves so everybody was represented from, people from one department 1 month would train on something that their department was doing or they were learning, and it was very interesting for everybody. And then unbeknownst to me, a group of them got together and they created a softball team to play in Omaha, and they called themselves the Silo Busters, which was awesome. And then we just created all these cross-functional improvement teams. So whatever we tackled, we made sure that it was cross-functional.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about, a few kind of frameworks that might be familiar to folks that are listening to this, that the idea that Lean is this kind of ultimate social technical system, and that it then is the management's job to kind of strike that balance, the right balance between social and technical, being sort of the role of a Lean manager, so to speak. But Lean managers don't just exist unto themselves, right? I mean, there's this concept of a kind of management system that we can develop that sort of supports those managers in striking that balance between the social and technical challenges that we face. So was there something in that dimension, the sort of around the management system that was being used that helped support some of the changes that we were trying to make?
Well, I can tell you that at the management level, every single one of the leaders was very aware of that operating in a silo was unacceptable. And so we actually did define behaviors that we said for leaders and ultimately their teams was unacceptable. Okay. And things like, you're not going to, once you do two email exchanges and you disagree on something, you have to get up and walk to that person's cubicle and talk to them.
I like that rule.
And so we put in a lot of things like that. But that's just leading up into the biggest thing, because putting in the Gemba boards was one of the biggest things that we could have done. It gave us so much energy, and it's funny because at the very beginning it was hard, but it just grew and grew with energy. And the way that we did it is, so you visualize 7 departments over a span of a whole floor of our headquarters, and every department put up their own Gemba board. And then what we created was they could do their Gemba walks themselves departmentally, however often they needed to. Some of them were weekly, some of them were daily, whatever they needed to do. But once a month, we put 2 hours on everybody's calendar, and we did a full Gemba walk to all 7 boards. It took us 2 hours. We always invited the chief executive officer, we invited the head of operating, we invited leadership to come. We often had them come and drop in. But the main message was that every person in the department had to go to their own board, plus at least 2 boards, because we wanted them to understand what everybody else was doing. And what ended up happening is most people went to all the boards. I mean, so you'd have this group of, hundreds of people trying to gather around this board, and, people were, we had to move boards in areas where we could,
into the auditorium,
into more places where we could get more room. We're all crammed together. But we made sure that it was a dialogue. And so it wasn't just them presenting. And so the Gemba boards and the Gemba walks were really powerful. In fact, when I retired from Union Pacific, my boss, they hired my predecessor from the outside, and my boss told me that he told my predecessor, look, you can change anything you want, but you're not changing the Gemba boards or the Gemba walks, because they're working really well.
Wow,
so it's pretty cool.
Well, another thing I'm curious about, so I guess it was maybe a month ago or something, we were having a conversation about Gemba boards and the practice of sort of having routines around these boards, the boards being, mechanisms for displaying what's going on, and also for visualizing like ahead or behind.
Yes.
Right? I mean, as a way to help us detect problems when they're occurring. And we were talking about that a month or so ago, because that's been a practice here at LEI that we've really made a big investment in to visualize our work even more so than we had before, and we're building kind of routines around the use of these Gemba boards or these visualizations. And I was sharing with you that as we've kind of begun that practice maybe in more earnest than in the past. That frankly, the experience that I and the team here have been having of working in that way at times has been fairly intense.
Yes.
The number of kind of problems, I guess, that it's forcing us to encounter at a high frequency. I mean, at sort of at least weekly. Can at times be just frankly kind of overwhelming, right?
Exactly.
I mean, things are sort of falling behind.
Yeah.
We hoped to get such and such done by such and such time, and we're unable to for any host of reasons. And you were sharing, I guess, some words of encouragement with me that was an experience that you could relate to, and I think it was these boards here with the supply chain group at UP that were giving you the experience that you were sharing with me to sort of say, it gets better. It'll get better. So I guess I'm curious, both for my own benefit, for the team's benefit here, maybe if you could share with me a little bit about, I guess over time it gets better, great. But, I guess maybe more specifically, like what is it about the use of these boards over time that gets better?
And it's actually several things. Let me just first mention the thing that was the most fulfilling to me is the development of the people that would present. You could watch them grow. So, the first, because we had everybody, we didn't say the leaders, we had everybody, people, whoever was doing the work was presenting. And sometimes they were interns, and sometimes they were new college hires, and sometimes they were people who were shy and never spoke a word in public. And then they're getting up in front of 200 people, and sometimes they had note cards and their hands were sweaty, and watching them gain confidence. After the first year, people would get up that I was thinking, one person had a language barrier in terms of English not being her native language, and sometimes she would struggle, and then she would get up and make jokes. She was like, she was blossoming in that environment. So I think the personal development of the people was inspiring. People got better at the boards. We did not have a template. We just said, look, we want you to celebrate your successes. We want you to be able to show us progress on the main things you're working on. We want to show if you've got A3s or projects. We want you to kind of have those on there. So I mean, and have fun with it. And they were at the beginning. Some of them had to redo them like 5 times before and I never told them to redo them. They did them because it wasn't what they wanted yet. But the boards themselves got better and better and better. And then just the fact that the metrics got better, the problems got fewer, everything just got to be so that it was like inspiring, at some point. Then it was just fun. And at first I was like, shoot me now. I know I have to smile, and I know I have to pretend I'm loving this, but I'm dying here, It was draining. I can be honest about that. But it got better pretty quickly. Yeah.
Well, I'll even, as we wrap up our conversation today, we can go walk around and I could. It's neat to hear you describe the sort of the iterations that were happening around those boards, because that's very much been the experience that we're having here too. So anyway, I'll go show you a board after this, and you'll see that it looks quite different than it did a month ago.
That's awesome.
So I think that's a good thing. It sounds like
good. Well, the most exciting thing after all that work was that 2 years later we redid the survey and did it in exactly the same manner, so that we didn't have any kind of unintended bias. Put them in pairs when they came to the town hall, gave them a piece of paper, spent 10 minutes talking about what's the best thing about the department and what's the worst thing, and turn in your pieces of paper. And when we looked at all of those pieces of paper that said what's the best thing, it says we work as a team.
That's incredible.
That was just like the best. Yeah.
So it's really, to hear, I mean, I guess we kind of covered, in our conversation today, we kind of covered three phases of the introduction of the UP Way at Union Pacific, from the initial training with the 40,000 folks in operations through to the use of the UP Way to achieve meaningful business results, to the sort of spread of the UP Way from operations into formerly supply, now supply chain. And with each of those, I'm struck by, I guess, just the intentionality, the kind of planfulness that you led the team to have in establishing both, clear objectives that could be measurable, and then the discipline to say, let's take some measurement at the beginning. Let's check over time, whether it's 2 to 4 months, or every 6 months, or in the case of the supply chain group, 2 years later rather. And to have available then as part of the story, the narrative of the lean implementation, here's where we were, here was the problem we were trying to solve, here's our understanding of its root causes, here are the countermeasures we deployed, and now, some time later, measurably, in your case, with statistical significance because of your background, things are better. Things are better. It's not a question as to whether we've, I guess, implemented the tools and the ideas that we intended to implement, and that those lean ideas, lean thinking and practices are in fact benefiting the business. I think maybe an experience dissimilar from many to have that level of discipline and kind of intentionality going into the introduction of the UP Way. Certainly something for me to reflect on in the changes that we'll always be implementing here, and then certainly the changes that we'll be supporting folks out in the lean community in implementing with their organizations. So anyway, thank you so much for your time again, and for sharing these stories, sharing these 3 phases, three big PDCA learning cycles that you went through there at Union Pacific. Thanks again.
Good. Thank you, Josh. My pleasure.
And that's a wrap. I want to thank Dr. Kelley once again for sharing her experience leading the implementation of the UP Way. I also want to thank the WLEI production team of Emma Ripa and Lori Moniz. If you want to be in touch, you can email us at pod@lean.org. Maybe you have some ideas for future podcasts. All right, I'm Josh Howell, signing off until next time.